It is not my fault. It wasn't my fault when I was a teenager, and it's not my fault when he was a grown man. You freeze. You don't know what to do. You just go with it. You just close your eyes and hope it finishes fast. He took the court papers, and he took a gun, and he took his life. I told the pastors what happened, and their response was to tell me I was lying. There was no investigation. I was just a kid who wanted to be loved. You took advantage of that.
Hi, this is Alicia Flames, and this is Feminine Flames. Today, I have the honor to introduce you to a woman who is a really, truly advocate for the human rights. She's had a very terrible childhood. She was not protected by the ones who should be protecting her, but she received a betrayal, and now she is a desert rose. You're going to meet her in a minute. So let's introduce Aalia Lanius. How are you, Lania?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you, Alicia.
So, Aalia, I would like you to introduce yourself a little bit more. Explain who you are for our audience.
Oh, thank you for that opportunity. So, I'm many things. I'm a multi-hyphenate at its best. I'm an executive producer, an award-winning novelist, which I take great pride in because I take my inspiration from the world and I look to write stories that create social impact. And then I am a certified human rights advocate. Um, Through those roles, I really, I get up every day like everyone else. I make a living, I take care of my family, but I also try to leave the world, hopefully, in just a little bit better ways than I find it at times. So that's what, and I do that in many different ways as I can.
And you say that you're a desert rose. I like this metaphor, it's very powerful. What does it mean to you?
For me, it means, what is a desert rose? A desert rose is a flower that blooms in the desert when it's not supposed to. I think the most significant things people don't, well, I think that we can learn from the desert rose is not only that it flourishes where it's not intended to, but it only does so because it's willing to grow. It's willing to, fight for its chance at life. And for me, you know, I've had a life that some people, and mind you, other people have had trauma. Many people have multiple traumas. I definitely am aware of that. Um, I haven't experienced every trauma, but believe me, when people sit down and hear my story, they're like, okay, that's quite a bit. And that's definitely more than the ordinary person probably experiences, especially where I grew up. I grew up in the States, in California. My family has been there for 200 years on my mom's side. And I, I grew up with this very mixed experience of good and extremely bad and extremely traumatic. And it landed me on my own at 14 years old. So that's kind of where the journey starts to take off from that as far as independently.
So let's talk a little bit about that childhood. Um, what happened in your childhood? You were taken into church, and what happened there?
Yeah. So I talk a lot about emotional intelligence. And as women, as mothers, my mother was a very smart woman, a businesswoman, not at all uneducated, but emotionally unintelligent. She got married young, as many women can do. She got married young, and I have one younger brother, and just through our life, she was very focused on herself. And at 14 years old, I started to kind of rebel a little bit, as very natural for teenagers, right? And my family was the type that said, if you don't like it, there's the door, but don't come back. And they weren't playing. So at 14 years old, I ended up looking for love, looking for unconditional love. And I think that it was very natural for me to look for that in faith, in church. So I began attending a Christian church in my neighborhood. I got very, very involved. I was taken in by some elders in the church, a couple, a married couple. And I was very excited to be there. But unfortunately, the man in the household, the husband, he took advantage of me. This wasn't the first time I had been taken advantage of. I'd actually gone through experiences as a child, but this was the first and most dramatic, um, for warning for your audience, a sexual assaults that I had experienced. Um, I internalized it. I didn't know how to handle the things that were happening. And when I finally came, I went to the church. I was sent, actually, I was soon after, which is not uncommon for sexual assault victims. Soon after, they ended up saying, well, we want to send you to the women's home. We want to send you to the Bible school. So I was outside of the house. When I went into the women's home, I told the pastors what happened. And their response was to tell me I was lying. It didn't happen, you know. There was no investigation. There were no proper protocols. There was nothing done to protect me. Mind you, I was still 15 years old when I told them. I was 14 when it happened, and I was 15 years old when I told them.
But who was the first person you told your story?
It was to the women, the director in the women's center. And then she took me to the pastors, and the pastors said, okay. But coincidentally, the husband was also their son-in-law. So it was, family. I was just a girl who had come into the home, essentially, and I didn't have their trust. I didn't have their belief. And eventually, um, I didn't have many places to go. At 15 years old, it's hard to be on your own, right? So I ended up eventually being bullied into retracting what happened to me and saying that it didn't happen when it did.
But what about your family, your parents? I mean, you just left them when you went to live with these people in church from the
When,
church.
yeah,
So you left the relationship with your family.
yeah. My parents divorced before I even knew they were married. I was a child, so I was raised mostly by my mother and her family. And again, very strict, very traditional in that sense. And to be honest, even kind of, when you talk about like old traditional American, but also kind of Latin, Hispanic families, if you don't listen, then you don't get to be there. And so it was a very, you're either in or you're out. So I didn't have them to go to tell them. I was completely reliant upon the church to do their job to protect me, especially because they also kind of had guardianship of me since I was in the school. And, you know, it was several things that happened. I remember the pastor coming over one day and she prays for me. And I have this very emotional experience because in my heart, I'm saying, in my heart and in my mind, I'm leaning on my faith that God is my defender, that God is my protector, and that the truth will set me free, right? I'm a child telling my truth. But unfortunately, they didn't believe it and it made them uncomfortable. The truth made them uncomfortable. So their response was to tell me, no, you're lying. And I'll never forget because the pastor, she got done praying for me and then she said, do you still want to tell is your story still the same? She says to me. And I said, absolutely. And I remember she just said, well, I thought that worked. And this was my pastor. This was somebody that I looked to as a child to protect me.
And how did you feel about it? Because she was supposed to be the pastor, the person who not only has to protect you, but is like in the name of God, right? So did your feelings or your beliefs to the religion change because of this?
So, what it did for me is it shifted my understanding at a very young age to not put people on pedestals and to recognize that people are people too. And sometimes they think they're being led by God, but they're not, and that's just the truth. That is just the truth. Not everybody, who wears a collar is perfect. Not everyone who carries the Bible lives what they're supposed to be doing, or how they're supposed to be shepherding a flock, as you will, as pastors are supposed to be doing. Sometimes they're not actually that good at that. And to learn that at such a young age was very, it kind of said, it more just shifted my understanding of, okay, I understand now what I'm dealing with. Um, I stayed in this home, And, I'll say that also there was the aspect of when it does come to troubled youth and troubled teens. And I say that troubled because, of course, I was troubled. I had also had trauma still in my childhood, other things, to be honest. Between the ages of 4 and 7 years old, I was molested by 5 different men. These things happened very innocently in front of people. I think that's one of my biggest things when I have these conversations with other parents, other people, other women, other fathers, my own husband included. I often try to explain to him these things happened to me while other people were around.
Well, what kind of things, of actions? I mean, to understand a little bit, because maybe some people are having something or had something similar and they don't see it, they see it normal. So,
Correct.
can you?
Of course, of course. Yeah, no. I mean, putting a child on your lap, putting your hand between the legs where they shouldn't be putting. I would get picked up by a man, a neighbor, uh, and then he would be putting his hands underneath my dress while other people were around. Things would like that would happen. At times, if I was left with somebody like an older male cousin or something, there was one person who wasn't blood cousin, but it was like an aunt who left me with her, nephew, and and they would do things to me while I was, by myself with them, and
Touching and stuff like that.
touching, ask me to do things to them. It was very, very inappropriate to do to children, to a child. And it was especially terrifying because at that age, you really don't know how to say stop. And then you don't know how to go and tell your parents that this happened to me. And so, I internalized a lot of things that happened to me. It also confused me. Excuse me. It also confused me. It confused my understanding of what relationships were like. And I saw men constantly doing things, or, I had men continually doing things to me that I knew wasn't right, but they did it anyways, right? So I say that to say that when I'm, fast forward to 14 years old, yet here I am once again. And this time I found the strength to speak up, but then I was told no.
But when you were 14, the actions were strong. I mean, like
Yes.
much more,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
like they were.
It was a sexual assault. When I was smaller, they were more molestations.
Mm-hmm,
This is how I
mm-hmm.
classify them. They
Okay.
were more molestations. Um, and then as I got older, then it was much more offensive. It was much more of a degrading attack on me as a young girl.
And how did you react the moment you were receiving those attacks? Uh, were you just,
Yeah,
why? I mean, what did you do? Did you um, tell something to the man who was attacking you?
I think it's very common. I mean, I can tell you. I mean, you freeze. You don't know what to do. You just, I mean, to be honest, you just go with it because you don't know how to stop it. You kind of just close your eyes and hope it finishes fast and that it's done. And then you try to process it. You try to process the shame because you feel like, I mean, you definitely have thoughts of like, did I do something to make them think I want this? Did I inadvertently, because as a teenager, even though I was out of my home, I wanted to be part of a family. I wanted to be loved. What little girl doesn't want to be loved by her dad, right? And even though this man wasn't my father, I saw him as a father figure. So then I felt guilty for thinking, well, gosh, was I too affectionate? Did my need for love
Went too far?
give a bad message that this was what I wanted? So it was very confusing for me too, because then I felt I had done something wrong, right? Which is very common for young women like myself. And then when I did speak up, to be told, no, nothing happened, or even to be given the slight insinuation of, well, if something did happen, you must have done something, you know. And I came from a church that was very, very strict. It was very, we weren't allowed to wear tank tops. We had to always be fully, it was a very modest evangelical church to go to, which there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to ask this of the young girls, then when they come to you with these offenses, then you have to take time to believe them, to hear them. And I say, especially in my case, you have to take yourself out of it and let the authorities do an investigation, or you have to let an investigation happen. You can't just become the judge and the jury and determine who's innocent and who's not.
Right. And when you told them, did they ever talk to him?
Directly, yeah, from what I understand. So what's interesting about this
What was
story,
the investigation of the
well, what I later found out, 30 years later, Alicia, I found out that the pastor just went to the husband and said, "Did you touch her? She says something happened." He said, "No." Apparently, he said no, he denied it, and
That's
that
it.
was it. That was the discussion. Because they were too happy. I think in reality, it made them very uncomfortable. So they were too happy to just, okay, well, you don't say anything, you say nothing happened. I mean, she's a young, troubled teen. Maybe she's embellishing. Maybe she's not. Because that's the stereotyping of a troubled girl, is that she is just going to lie. She's just going to exaggerate. When in
That's right.
fact, the reality is those, myself included, are some of the most violated young girls, because the people who violate us assume nobody will believe us, you know?
They know you're the right ones to attack,
Of
the
course,
easiest.
of course. And that is why a lot of grooming and a lot of, inappropriate behavior towards young girls is done by men who are looking for troubled girls, who maybe they don't have a father in the home, and maybe mother's working all the time. They look for the opportunity to take advantage of them.
So you continued living with them after this incident, not only the incident, but after speaking up, right?
Yeah, I did.
How did your view change towards him and towards his wife?
Yeah.
How did you feel there?
Well, it was an interesting thing, because if anything, for his wife, I felt sorry. I did, honestly, quite honestly. She was a woman who was just going to work. They had their children. From my perspective, she was a loving, caring wife who was doing the right thing. But even for her, she didn't want to accept that her husband could do such a thing. No woman does. I mean, I'm married. I mean, I understand that. But my feelings just changed again. I became very objective about it. I had to stay. I didn't have many places to go as a teenager with no family support, in my opinion. And I really was dedicated to, quote unquote, being on my own, making decisions to an extent for myself. The church that I was in, they had a women's home, and then they had a car wash that we worked in. We were exploited. We were working. I mean, that was one thing. People always say to me, "Well, why did you stay?" But then they never really kind of think about, why did the church keep me? Right? Like, if I was such a bad person and I come and I bring this accusation, why not tell me you're going to have to go somewhere else? Well, the reason for that was because they exploited the people in the homes. I was working, I was not allowed to go to high school. I was doing my homework. I graduated high school by the light of a closet at night because I shared a room with 5 other women. Um, we were working the car wash. They had an all hand car wash. And from 7 in the morning, or excuse me, from 8 in the morning till 6 in the evening, 6 days a week, no breaks, no lunch. We were not paid. We weren't even allowed to keep the tips. Everything went to the pastors. And while the pastors drove around in nice cars and lived in a nice house, we lived in an apartment where 12 girls lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. And one month, I remember, we didn't even have electricity for a month. We had to take cold showers because they were taking the money. So it was an experience that I cannot begin to tell you. But as soon as I turned 18, I was actually about 17 and a half, 17 and a half. And I remember I had a conversation. I had graduated the program, and I said, okay, I'm leaving. And the same pastor who came to me, and she says, well, I prayed about it, and God told me you're not ready to leave yet. Of course, because they needed me to keep working.
God
I
told
said,
me
well, that's
that.
funny because I prayed and God told me I'm good.
Different God here.
Different conversation, different God. I don't know. He's giving me different messages. And, and thanks to God, he gave me the strength and the courage, and I left. And it's not to say that I still didn't bounce into adulthood, but I left that space. I left that situation. I grew in my faith as an individual. And what a lot of people know today is I started my first business when I was 22 years old. I started my first company at 25, and by the time I was 28 years old, I had already built a multi-million-dollar company. Um, and it was at that point, uh, 30 years later, that I'm a mother and, successful in my life and doing many, great, wonderful things that I'm very proud of. And I have a friend who was an LAPD detective, Los Angeles police detective. And he said to me, he came to me, he says, because he knew my story, we'd worked together in advocacy.
Is that Moses Castillo?
That is Detective
Okay.
Moses Castillo. He is literally, I know I tell this, he is a literally real life, like Detective Stabler from the show that used to be very popular, Special Victims Unit, because that's what he focused on. He was a detective for crimes against women and children. And so we had crossed paths through different ways. And eventually in 2020, Gavin Newsom in California, the governor, he enacted a look back window for survivors of sexual assaults and sexual abuse. This was a result of like the Boy Scouts and some of the churches that had covered up things. So it gave people like myself, as long as you could meet certain criteria and kind of prove your case, you could bring a claim in civil court, no matter how long ago it was, and actually hold people accountable for their behavior. So I had moved on with my life, Alicia. I had learned what empowerment was. I had given myself the healing I needed. Genuinely, I say this, like I had come to terms that people do things that they're not supposed to, and that's just, and you do deal with that.
So your life was kind of normal, regular. You could be with other men without any problem. You didn't have a trauma.
I mean, through my life and my relationships, I definitely would. Yeah, that's a separate conversation
Okay.
on the trauma. I mean, it's part of the conversation, absolutely. As a woman, no, I mean, I, the way that I viewed men, the way that I viewed relationships, I was very, and actually, I preferred to be a modest, conservative woman because I'd been violated so many times as a child and as a young woman that I was like, it's not, when I finally became empowered, it's like, you're not going to have access to me. You're not going to be able to touch me. You're not going to be able to look at me if I don't want you to look at me a certain way. I was able to gain control in that sense. But, I mean, my husband would even tell you that he still sees remnants of the trauma of being violated as a child to this day in my life. Sure. But those little bits and pieces of me, I think they'll be with me forever. They are part of who I am.
So what happened when Moses Castillo told you that you could speak up?
Yeah.
What gave you the courage to, to unbury all those moments?
Right? Because going back, some people aren't comfortable going back into their past. And I would be easy. I'm an easy target for people who want to attack me on a past that's not perfect. Of course, yes. So some people have a hard time un, you know, going back in and overturning things that you have buried. So at first my reaction was, thank you so much, but I'm not really interested in it. I didn't, I felt like I was good. I didn't need to be told anything. I knew. And he just looked at me and he says, I know what you would tell someone else. I was like, oh, great. He's like, you would tell somebody else that they deserve justice, that they deserve their time. And I knew he was right, because that is what I would tell somebody. That's what I tell people all the time, right? So I went along with it. I said, okay, fine. We'll go down this road. I was fortunate enough to find people, in fact, the very director of the women's home that I had first told. After 30 years, I was able to track her down and get a verification from her. And I was able to satisfy the merits of a civil case. And we took it to court, or we filed it. Um, there were many things that happened subsequent to that. The pastor, she actually admitted on tape. That's when I found out that she didn't know it, but she actually admitted that she had not really believed me and that she had asked her son-in-law at the time, "Hey, did you do anything?" And he said no, and that was pretty much it for her. That's all she needed to satisfy her idea of what was truth and what was not. Um, we went through the process like anything, and I want to say this to any person who ever goes through this, because as the governments potentially allow more victims to ever come forward, it is a process. It's not fast, it's not overnight. I think I filed my case in 2021. We just settled it last year in 2024, finally. But in 2022, and one of the other things Moses did that was amazing, aside from getting the pastor to admit what she had done and us tracking down other people to validate the story that I had told the church that they never went and, told anyone, the he actually texted me one night and he said, "I've got Steve." Steve was the name of the man who had sexually assaulted me. And he said, "I have him here." Now, 30 years later, he's married to someone else. He's living in LA, outside of LA. And I get on this phone, Alicia, and I am like, I am just, maybe I was like a chihuahua. I don't know. I felt very, I don't want to say chihuahua, but I was so empowered. I get on the phone knowing he's maybe going to give me an apology, but I don't want to hear it initially. I want him to hear that I knew I was right all along. I knew I had done nothing wrong, right? All those questions I had when I was younger, like, did I do something wrong? I was just a kid who wanted to be loved. I told him I did nothing wrong. I was just a kid who wanted to be loved. You took advantage of that and you lied. And so so I kind of lay into him, and then he goes, "You're right." He goes, "You're absolutely right." He goes, "Everything you're saying is correct." He goes, "I'm sorry, I was a coward. I didn't want my marriage to get ruined. I didn't know how to handle. I didn't know what was wrong with me. You know, he goes, "I promise I never did it to anyone else." Not that I believed him at the time, but we just, we had to get his confession. The thing is, in August 22, he actually, on one of our court dates, well, let me actually back up. So we had that conversation. It
That
was
was
fun.
in the beginning of 2022?
That was yes. And then, or actually in about 2021, because it was right before we filed, because we had to get his confession kind of before we filed for more
Right.
evidence. And then we filed. And then in August 2022, on one of the court dates, he went to a hotel room, he took the court papers, and he took a gun, and he took his life. And that was a very overwhelming feeling, to be honest. I felt sad for him that that's the road that he took. Um, and I had a couple different lenses through which I looked at that. I thought it was, look, whenever someone takes their own life on that conversation, you should know that there's people to talk to, that hopefully there's people that love you. What he had done was horrible, yes, but to deal with the consequences, he could have gotten through. Um, but I also look at through the view that when you come to that level of thinking, at least he took his life and he didn't come after me and my family, because that could have also been an outcome, you know? So it felt heavy for me. And once again, it was a bit of a coward move to make me feel like I had done something wrong, to then, like, by seeking my justice, that it somehow would prompt this man to take his life. I refuse to take that responsibility. It is not my fault. It wasn't my fault when I was a teenager. And it's not my fault when he was a grown man and I'm an adult and he had his choice. He chose to take the easy way out and not deal with the consequences. So, yeah, that was an extremely difficult situation. And still the church fought me. Still the church didn't want to recognize it. Still took them another 2 years to settle the case. Yeah.
So do you think that the church were more guilty than him in a way? Or what do you think?
Their guilt is a different kind of guilt. And guilty of denying me, and even fighting me in accepting still the truth after all those years, and even after he took his life, instead of seeing that as like, okay, this is, clearly an act, instead of saying, okay, what, he admitted it, like, instead of kind of coming off with it and saying, okay, clearly
This is a clear sign that it happened.
that, it's still, and again, that still resides with the church and the individuals involved in that. Like, I refuse to carry their burden of what they needed to do and what they still probably need to do, you know? And instead, I take this story, and this is the first time I've really sharing this. I've shared it from one side on giving people awareness when the law came into being. I wanted other people to be aware of it, so I shared my story then. But many people don't know that the settlement has happened. They don't know the outcome. This is the first time that I'm really publicly sharing that information, and that it took, you know, 4 years for them to finally accept responsibility and and do the right thing.
What's now your opinion about the church?
When I speak about the church, and I'm speaking, that church specifically, I think that they're still on the same path that they've been on. It's a very controlling, it's a very limited belief system. But my thoughts on the church, on faith in general, is that it is a beautiful thing. Many people, look, all the education that I gained, the the view of faith that I have, and my relationship is stronger because I'm not focused on people. I am truly focused on the spirituality of any church, any faith, any practice, because at the end of the day, that is what it is, a practice. You know, I just wish that more people um, didn't stop to understand that. As much what was preached in church was that man will fail you, and yet they forget that within the pews, within the chairs, within the mosques, within the temples, no matter what area it is, and I just, yeah, I can't begin to tell you, my view and my thoughts is that everywhere you go, there's people, and there's capability of beautiful, and then there's also capability of negative and dark secrets that nobody wants to uncover, you know?
Hmm. And all this experience that you've had, how has it shaped you as an advocate? Um, what made you, you know, go for that path, like to help survivors of
Yeah.
situations like yours?
It hugely impacted my desire to empower other people, and also to just educate, because consistently, and I think that's while it's a very uncomfortable conversation, consistently people still do not like to acknowledge the obvious. I had a situation where one of my children was in a school. I caught a PE after school coach talking inappropriately to the kids on social media, and there were just some very evident things, and he was fired for the things that I found. But when I talked to other parents, Alicia, and I showed them, this is what he's saying, they still denied it. They would say, oh, maybe he was just joking. Oh, maybe he was just, but he's such a nice guy. We like him so much. The kids love him. And what I think people fail to understand is that's the point. That's often predators are very well liked people. They're not always the scary guy in a corner that's giving a weird vibe. And I feel sorry for those parents because, again, when I talk about what happened to me when I was a child, people just didn't notice. They didn't think at all that those things were happening. And I know I'm not the only child that suffers as a result of it or suffered, you know.
So, who do you think we have to educate more, parents or kids?
It's both.
And
It's both.
yeah,
It's educating parents to stop being blind to things that are just realistically a problem. When you really do look at the statistics of children and young teens that are, sexually violated, those stats are unfortunately extremely high, and then they're underreported because most kids don't know how to talk about it. They don't know where to go. And that's the education for kids, giving them the voice, not shutting them down when something makes an adult uncomfortable, right? Um, and unfortunately, a lot of times in families, cousins and things happen, and then parents kind of just, oh, well, we don't want to make it uncomfortable. But you have to deal with those things because the impression on the child is that they've done something wrong, that they don't have protectors, and and then it just goes, it lends to the trauma that they have to deal with in the rest of their life, in the rest of their relationships, like you've said. I didn't trust men. I don't trust a lot of men to this day, not like in this malicious kind of, oh, you're a bad person, but I don't off to face just trust men. um, Knowing that there are good men out there, that's beside the point. That is beside the point. And right now, as I've noticed a lot. I just moved from Los Angeles. We moved over here. We moved to Spain. I'm so happy. But one thing that's very, very concerning to me is a lot of conversations I'm starting to hear that are questioning things like, why is pedophilia wrong? Literally, quite literally, I'm seeing conversations where grown men are starting to say, well, hey, years and years ago, grown men, a 40-year-old man could marry a 15-year-old girl. Why can't we do that now? Why? They're asking the wrong questions. Why did we stop? You know, young people deserve the chance to grow up. Young women and young men have deserved the chance to come into an understanding of these very sensitive, subjects, and the adults have to protect them. Have to. And for me, it's a very passionate, when it comes to human rights, as a human rights advocate, it is my right for you to keep your hands off of me. Right? It is my right to not be violated. And so when we have a kind of this questioning of principles that are intended to protect children and young people from sexual violence and molestation, it is critical that we do not start retreating backwards into language and conversations that strip away protections for them. Like, this is something that absolutely blows my mind right now. It's very, very concerning to me that I'm hearing people talk like that.
So, what are the signals that we could see that you can teach, tell parents what things they have to observe to see that there's something going on, or could be something going on?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's behavior. A lot of times it's behavior. I encourage, if you are a parent, who feels that your child is acting out, then what I always suggest is find a medium that they can express themselves through. Get them a sketchbook, get them pen and paper, take creative writing courses even with them, or give them a space to where they can find a way to share what's happened. Maybe for some child or for some person, it's easier to draw a picture. Maybe it's easier to tell a fictional story. But you have to create a way and a path for them to express what's happened in a comfortable way. Because it's not easy, right? Like, even for me as a child, when things happened to me, it wasn't like over dinner I could be like, hey, mom, pass the salt. By the way, somebody inappropriately touched me. So finding mediums that, and a lot of times parents, when they see things or experience things with their kids, if the kid is wetting a bed or if the kid is acting out at school, instead our assessment is, you're misbehaving, you're not listening to me, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, and so I'm just going to issue punishment, without ever really finding out why are they doing that, or what is the problem. Because again, going back to my own experience, you don't know how to process it, and um, I wasn't actually able to rebel in the Christian church that I was in, because again, I was on my own. I had to live there. I had to, but um, yeah, with other kids I've seen, in my advocacy work and things, you see a lot of, kids start to retreat. You can start to see children start doing things that they had moved past in their life, and then they kind of start maybe going back into infancy, because again, you just want to be protected as a child. So there's, again, to me, one of the biggest things is finding the way, take them to a therapist. There's nothing wrong with taking a child to a therapist. As much as we've been told going to therapy is horrible, um, while the right therapist is critical, giving space for a child, if that is the case, if that is the thing that you need to uncover, some sort of abuse or some sort of trauma that they went through without a parent knowing, then if you love your child, you want to find a way for them to be able to express themselves and get it out. Because those words, sometimes just getting the words out of your mouth, this person did this to me, it's the hardest thing to do.
And to a woman who has suffered something similar to you, um, how how did you what tools or what things you did to overcome everything? Because you can see you're very, I mean, you have a lot of power. You're a woman. You don't. I cannot feel like right away that you are a traumatized woman, and
Right.
but some of them are probably in silence and sad and very close. And so, what can they do to help themselves to overcome this situation?
Well, I mean, on one sense, or in one hand, everything I'm saying as advice, I've taken myself. I found my creative outlets. That's why for me, writing is important and artistry and creativity because it allows me a space to say what I need to say and feel what I need to feel. Um, and the second part is sorry, my brain is kind of doing a switch. The second part is I will. It's funny that you say that. Sorry, my brain switched because yes, I don't look like damaged goods. That is what I am the desert rose. That is the thing. I went from damaged goods to desert rose. And recognizing that I could do that and recognizing that at times I might still feel it. That's okay though. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be made whole. Through creative arts, I've come to understand, I think, the human being and human experience so much more. For example, Van Gogh has a famous picture of a vase with the flower,
That's right.
and then the one that's broken in half, right? He still did the picture. Some people, why is there a broken flower? Because nothing is perfect. No one is perfect. They have the Japanese tradition of when you have a vase that breaks, they don't just throw away the vase, they fill it with
I love it.
gold in the cracks. And so when you recognize that you still have value and that no one can take that away, that is what leads you to, like I always say, my evolution became my revolution. My understanding of myself and understanding, like I tell my kids, life is a sequence of events. There are going to be beautiful moments and there'll be ones that just rip your core to pieces and make you question, why do I have to live in this life? But like somebody pointed out, a heartbeat goes up and down. If you're a flat line, you're just not living. So you have the good with the bad. And when you can come to understand that, then it just makes you a more powerful being in this universe. You're like the Matrix. Anything that comes at you, you're like Keanu. It's flying by. You're able to do because you know your place. Does that make sense?
Yes. And about your career, how everything that happened to you led you to what you're doing today.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's even in marketing and even in the ways that I've built my businesses, I've always done it from a humanistic perspective. I, you know, I understand capitalism has a way to help us make money and provide, and that's fine. But how are we doing it ethically? Are we still treating people well? Am I, I used to have stores and Thanksgiving, we'd give away turkeys and we'd do these things that people would be like, well, why are you doing that? I'm like, because I care about my community. And I don't want people to just come in and think, I just want to make money off of them. I care about their situation. I care about their families. I care about my employees' families. And to this day, I think just the way that I see people, that just helped me become more successful because I treated people like people. I mean, sure, there's definitely some billionaires that could care less about anybody and they're violating human rights left and right, but they're very successful. But you know what? I always I remind myself that their karmic debt is vastly different from my karmic debt. And I want to be successful, but success to me is measured differently. I want people to know I didn't just use them, I cared about them, you know? And so it just, yeah, I think having that mentality has helped me build a more successful business and be known. I had a very, very successful store. My ex-husband and I, it was the number one performing store in all of LA market. And the president of the company came in to me and he said, every year you're the number one market. What are you doing? I was like, I treat people like people. I treat people like they matter because guess what? They do, you know? So that's always been my philosophy.
How beautiful. So it's been a great conversation, and I would love for you to send a last message. The message that you would tell yourself when you were a child, and the message that, oh, what do you think that? Okay, first let's start with this one. First, what would you tell your little child and any other people who are watching us?
Oh, I would tell her, um, you're more stronger and you're stronger and more beautiful than you could even know. And I'm not talking about beauty from an external, I'm talking about internal. And I learned that as went on. I learned that. But I would tell that child that. Um, and right now, significantly in the world, unfortunately, a lot of children are suffering. Children are suffering that shouldn't. I have a saying that until we see each other as human beings first, without what faith are you, what color are you, what religion are you, what economic status, to seeing people as people first, unfortunately, wars will be fought that shouldn't, and people will suffer that shouldn't have to, and die that shouldn't have to. And right now is a critical moment. I think it's a moment for humanity to really step up because for me specifically, while I care about every human being, children and young adults are very, very important to me. My last novel was focused on two 14-year-olds. And I say this because we're the adults in the room, and we should be, and we are capable of making, better lives for them. And so right now, I think that the big call to action is for how are we allowing children to suffer in this world? And if conversations are going to start reversing back also, again, on surrounding conversations of what is, appropriate and inappropriate towards children, a lot of people have to step up and fight to not only create more protections, but definitely reinforce the current protections that we have in place for children around the world.
And Alia, what do you think that your that girl, when she was 14, if she came now and saw you how you are, this desert rose, what do you think she would think and say?
That little girl is looking at me every day in the mirror. And every day that girl says, I can't believe this is your life. Um, yeah, she says, I can't believe this is your life.
She could never ever imagine the fantastic life that you have after those.
Yeah, no. That little girl sitting in the closet doing her homework, that little girl getting up every day, that girl crying, asking God to be her defender. Today, she looks at me in the mirror every time and says, I'm proud of you and I'm happy for you. And all I want to do is be able to give that to other kids and other teens.
That's very, very, very powerful and very beautiful. I think you did it all with your faith and with your power, your inner flame. So I'm glad you're very proud of you. You have to be very proud of you. So I would like to give you this beautiful flower. It's not a rose, it's an orchid. So thank you so much for this very brave conversation full of truth.
Thank you.
The truth that they didn't want to hear, but the truth that it's what it is.
Mm.
It cannot be denied. And I'm really glad that finally there was justice. And I hope that there's justice for every single woman and every single kid in the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if you feel inspired, like I felt today, I would love you to let your comments, because I think this is very powerful. And I'm sure many women in the world are suffering in silence. So please share this conversation with as many women as possible so we are all aware of what's going on in the world. But this is also a conversation of hope. There's hope, and we can help each other. Be tuned, and I hope to see you in the next episode of Feminine Flames.